Imagine a structure so magnificent it was known as one of the wonders of the ancient world. A building of dazzling white marble and shimmering gold, so vast that it dominated the skyline of the most revered city on earth. This was the Temple in Jerusalem. For the Jewish people, it was more than just a building. It was the center of their universe, the dwelling place of God Himself, a symbol of their covenant and their identity that had stood for centuries. It seemed as eternal as the mountains surrounding it. Now, imagine standing before this glorious monument and hearing a respected teacher, a man you deeply admire, turn to you and say, all of it, every last stone, will be thrown to the ground. That is the scene that unfolds in the Gospels. Jesus Christ, in the final week of His life, is leaving the temple complex. His disciples, filled with awe, are pointing out its grandeur. And it is here that Jesus delivers one of the most shocking, specific, and historically verifiable prophecies ever recorded. Today, we journey back in time to explore that terrifying warning. We will look at the precise details Jesus gave about the coming destruction of Jerusalem. And then we will step into the pages of history to see how, less than 40 years later, those words were fulfilled with chilling and brutal accuracy. This isn't just a history lesson. It's an investigation into the very authority of Jesus' words and a testament to the fact that when He speaks, the world listens, and history itself is compelled to obey. The disciples, stunned by this prediction of total annihilation, pulled Jesus aside and asked the obvious questions. When will this happen? And what will be the sign? And Jesus doesn't give them a vague, mystical riddle. He gives them a clear, observable, and actionable set of warnings. He speaks of coming deception, of wars and rumors of wars. But He tells them not to be alarmed, for these are just the beginning of birth pains. Then He gives them the key, the one unmistakable sign that the end for Jerusalem was imminent. He says in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, "When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near." This was the final alarm bell. Not a metaphor, not a spiritual symbol, but a geopolitical, military event that they would see with their own eyes. And He follows this sign with an urgent command. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. It was a clear instruction for survival. When you see the armies, run. Don't hesitate, don't pack your belongings, don't second guess. Flee. He then describes the fate of the city and its people with heartbreaking clarity. He says they will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So, let's recap the prophecy. A complete demolition of the magnificent temple with not one stone left on another. A clear sign to watch for, the city being surrounded by armies. A clear command, flee for your lives. And a clear description of the outcome, mass casualties, mass enslavement, and the occupation of the holy city. For the disciples hearing this, it must have been almost impossible to believe. This was the holy city, the city of David, protected, they believed, by God Himself. But a prophecy had been spoken. A warning had been given. And for the next 4 decades, as a generation came and went, the great temple continued to stand, and the words of Jesus hung in the air, waiting for their terrifying appointment with destiny. For 4 decades, the temple stood, a shining jewel in the heart of Judea. A generation was born and came of age under its shadow. And perhaps, as the memory of Jesus' ominous words began to fade, some began to believe they were merely the ramblings of a failed revolutionary. But a prophecy from the Son of God is not a suggestion, it is an appointment. And as the political climate in Judea began to boil, history started its inexorable march towards that terrifying appointment. In the year 66 AD, resentment against the oppressive Roman occupation exploded into open rebellion. Jewish rebels, known as zealots, rose up, overpowering the Roman garrison in Jerusalem in a shocking initial victory. A spirit of fervent, nationalistic pride swept the nation. They believed God was on their side, that they were marching toward a glorious new independence. But they had forgotten the warning. They had mistaken the beginning of the birth pains for the final victory. The Roman Empire did not tolerate rebellion. The Emperor Nero dispatched his most formidable general, Vespasian, with 3 legions of his best soldiers to crush the revolt. They began a slow, methodical, and brutal campaign, sweeping through the Galilean countryside and pushing the rebellion back towards its heart, Jerusalem. By the year 70 AD, Vespasian had become emperor, and the task of finishing the war fell to his son, Titus. Titus arrived at the gates of Jerusalem with a massive army, reinforced with even more troops. He surrounded the city, building a wall of siege around it, cutting off all supplies, all hope of escape. The sign, the one unmistakable sign Jesus had given, had now come to pass. Jerusalem was surrounded by armies. And here, we find a remarkable and crucial piece of history. The early church historian Eusebius records that the Christian community living in Jerusalem, seeing the Roman legions gather, remembered the words of their Lord. They understood the sign, and before the final siege wall was completed, they did exactly as Jesus had commanded 40 years earlier. They fled. They left the city and escaped to the mountains, finding refuge in a town called Pella. While the rest of the city braced for a war they believed they could win, the followers of Jesus trusted his warning, and they were saved. His prophecy was not a curse. It was an act of mercy, a blueprint for survival for those who had ears to hear. Inside the city walls, a nightmare unfolded. The Jewish historian Josephus, who was an eyewitness to these events, describes a scene of almost unimaginable horror. As the Romans pressed from the outside, the city devoured itself from the inside. Rival zealot factions fought each other in the streets for control, burning the city's grain supplies in their madness. A horrific famine took hold. People ate leather, straw, and eventually things too terrible to speak of. The city that had rejected the Prince of Peace was now consumed by a hell of its own making. Finally, the Roman war machine broke through. The city was taken street by bloody street. The magnificent temple, the pride of the nation, was set ablaze. Josephus writes that Titus had wanted to preserve it, but in the chaos and fury of the battle, it was consumed by a torrent of fire. The real fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy, however, came in the aftermath. As the temple burned, the vast quantities of gold that adorned its ceilings and walls melted and ran down between the great foundation stones. To get every last drop of this precious metal, the Roman soldiers were ordered to systematically pry apart and overturn every single stone. Just as Jesus had predicted, not one stone was left on top of another. The rest of the prophecy was fulfilled with the same brutal precision. Josephus estimates that over 1 million people died in the siege, and the vast majority of the survivors, tens of thousands of them, were taken as prisoners, sold into slavery in Egypt, or scattered as captives to all the nations of the Roman Empire. The holy city was utterly trampled and destroyed. The smoking ruins of Jerusalem and its once glorious temple stood as a silent, terrifying testament to the accuracy of Jesus' words. But this prophecy is not just a remarkable piece of historical evidence. It was given for a far deeper purpose. So why is this important for us today? What does this tragic event from 2,000 years ago reveal about the identity of Jesus and the nature of hope itself? First, the fulfillment of this prophecy is one of the most powerful validations of Jesus' authority. In a world full of vague predictions and mystical riddles, Jesus' words were not cloudy or ambiguous. They were specific, detailed, and short-term. He gave a clear sign to look for and a clear action to take, and the timeline was within a single generation. The chilling, literal precision with which history obeyed his prediction demonstrates that his words are not the product of human wisdom or clever guesswork. They are the words of one who stands outside of time, who sees the end from the beginning. If Jesus was right with such terrifying accuracy about the fate of a city, it compels us to take his other claims with the utmost seriousness. His claims about his own identity, about the human soul, about the reality of heaven and hell, and about the way of salvation. Second, this story provides us with a powerful model for trust. Remember the Christians who fled to Pella? Their story is a real-world parable. They were presented with two competing realities: the seeming strength and security of Jerusalem's massive walls and the unseen warning of their Lord. They chose to trust the word of Jesus over the evidence of their eyes, and because of their faith, they were delivered. In the same way, we are often faced with a choice. Will we trust in the fleeting security of this world, our finances, our status, our own strength, or will we trust in the unseen but unshakable promises of Jesus? The flight to Pella is a timeless reminder that listening to and obeying the words of Christ is always the path to true safety and salvation. And this leads us to the final, most inspirational truth. The same Jesus who spoke these words of judgment also spoke words of incredible promise. He prophesied his own death and, more impossibly, his own resurrection on the third day, and he fulfilled it. He promised eternal life to all who would believe in him, and he promised that one day he will return not as a suffering servant, but as a victorious king to wipe away every tear and make all things new. The destruction of Jerusalem, in a way, becomes a firm foundation for our hope. It proves that Jesus' words are the most reliable, trustworthy reality in the universe. If his word of warning was fulfilled down to the very last stone, then we can have an unshakable confidence that his words of promise will also be fulfilled down to the very last detail. The tragedy of 70 AD is a dark moment in history, but the faithfulness of God's prophetic word through it all becomes a shining beacon of hope for the future. So, the prophecy of Jerusalem's fall is far more than just a history lesson. It is a powerful proof of Christ's authority, a timeless model of trust, and a solid anchor for our hope in all the promises that are yet to be fulfilled. It reminds us that no matter how chaotic the world may seem, the words of Jesus are the surest thing we can build our lives upon. If this exploration of history and prophecy has strengthened your faith or sparked your curiosity, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Join us as we continue to uncover the profound truths and the unshakable hope found within the pages of the Bible.